I
There we
see
go. We're
people hopping
alive.
on. That's awesome. Wow. Hey, Brooke. Seeing folks jumping in. Feel free to tell us where you're from, where you're tuning in from in the chat. I see Mark, Kathy, Nancy, Mandy. A lot of good folks here. Taylor. But this is so exciting. Karen, I called you Dr. Pryor for many years, and then you corrected me, said you could just call me Karen. And I try to lean towards, respecting all the hard work, especially women, people of color do. But yeah, this is so exciting to be able to do this conversation. And, we have been online friends for a number of years. We've
Yeah.
attracted the same trolls and haters. And, you were kind enough to share the story of my ancient St. Thomas Indian Christian family in your book, The Evangelical Imagination, which I highly recommend. And then I ended up signing with the same publisher, Brazos Press, and working with the same folks. And here we are today. First-time published author, a veteran published author, and
Well, it's my
uh,
first time doing Substack Live, so
yeah.
first time.
But no, this is great, Karen, and so excited to have this conversation. Karen, I'll actually ask you to introduce yourself first, maybe to my subscribers who may not know you, to the odd ones who may not know you, and then I'm happy to do the same.
Okay, thank you. I'm Karen Swallow Pryor. I am a writer and author. On Substack, I host a newsletter called The Priory, where I try to put my and my readers' attention more toward the good, true, and beautiful, and in particular literature, because I have was for a long time an English professor, now just a freelance writer and speaker, and so glad to be here with you today, Joash.
Yeah, so great to do this, Karen. And a couple of things stand out to me about your background. One is you're an actual communicator. You're an actual trained writer, a literature expert, and you've through that lens taught us so much, and taught me so much. And the other thing I've always appreciated about you, Karen, is you have been so generous with your experience, insights as an author, writer. I've been listening to podcasts of yours where you've been interviewed, where you're giving tips to first-time writers or authors or aspiring authors. And I took a lot of those tips to heart myself, and it's shaped my own journey. So yeah, just want to honor that
Mhm.
too. And,
You.
thank you for just being so generous with the information you've learned. I think we're culturally conditioned to be selfish with those things, but you embody the way of Jesus and that generosity. So grateful for that. Um, if you're new to me, my name's Joash Thomas. I live in the Toronto area in Canada. I'm a first-time author. My book, The Justice of Jesus, came out about a month ago. Yeah. And yeah, and I mean, I say that I'm just a guy standing in front of the church asking all of us to care about justice for all our marginalized neighbors. I've worked in international human rights for the last decade of my life. Before that, I worked in Georgia Republican political consulting, and so people can change. There's hope for people all sides of the political spectrum. For me, just speaking for myself, I had my political idols that Jesus needed to break. And yeah, I find myself here today calling the church to care about justice. I'm a public theologian, get to teach at churches, conferences around the world. And my Substack is Jesus, Justice, and Joash. I'm also an ordained minister in an Anglican Episcopal tradition. We're basically a bunch of people from Pentecostal backgrounds who found beauty in the ancient liturgies and sacraments of the church, and so that's where I find myself here. This should be an exciting conversation. Karen, you just had a book come out called "You Have a Calling," which is so beautiful. It's
Mhm.
I thought it was an easy read in the sense of just a very accessible read. There's so much depth
Mhm.
here, but it's so accessible to your readers. the stories being told, and yeah, just the wisdom being offered is so good. And what I've loved about how you promoted the book is you've spotlighted the voices and callings of others in your networks and outside your networks, and saying, "Hey, this is what their calling has looked like." But I'd love to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about this book, and yeah, what the journey to writing this looked like.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm a teacher at heart. I may not be in the classroom full time anymore, but teaching is my calling. And so when you mentioned my willingness to share about my, writing tips and my experience, I mean, that's just the teacher in me. That's what I do. And this book was actually written drawing on 2.5 decades of experience teaching college students, but then more and more going out and speaking and talking to people of all ages. And there are lots of books on calling. I had to read half of them to write this book.
Mm,
But in our particular moment, I think we just have a distorted view of calling. I mean, that what you're talking about in your book is really about a lot of distortions that we have
mm.
about good, eternal, lasting truths, but just aren't quite right, in our cultural moment. And so I think in talking about calling, we have an overly romanticized, idealized notion of calling, and I wanted to just kind of bring it down to bring some freedom to our that burden that too many bear about having to do big, powerful, good, great things for God, when really it's just through the ordinary things that we are called to in multiple ways over the course of our lives that bring glory to Him and ultimately serve our neighbors, which is what calling is all about, serving our neighbors. And that's really what you're talking about in your book as well. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I love that description. What I hear you saying, Karen, is something that I say in my book as well, The Justice of Jesus, where I basically say that I say success is the currency of empire, but faithfulness is the currency of the self sacrificing kingdom of God, right? And so many of us are shaped by the empires of our day into prioritizing success. So we love Jesus, but because we're shaped by these, because our imagination is shaped by these other empires of our day, and you talk about this in your other book, The Evangelical Imagination, um, because of that, we tend to go after the next best thing, and we prioritize numbers and revenue and metrics like that over neighbors, like you said, people that God has entrusted us to care for in our midst, and our marginalized neighbors too, and that can often lead to us doing really really weird things. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about this before we jumped on. You mentioned that. Uh, as you were annotating my book and reading through it, you were seeing connections between things that you've been writing about, especially the empire side. I'd love to go into that and have a conversation around that.
yeah. So, I mean, obviously, one of the big things that you talk about in the justice of Jesus is colonization, right? I mean, if we're living in North America right now, no matter our backgrounds, it doesn't really matter. We're all very, very influenced and shaped by a past that is rooted in colonization, right? We just are in some ways. And so, I mean, in the evangelical imagination, I'm talking really about our social imaginaries, which consist of a lot of unexamined assumptions that we make that are beneath the surface. And we don't even know they're there. We don't know that they're driving us. We don't know that they're assumptions. We don't know that they are sometimes distortions until we start opening ourselves up to other stories and ways of seeing things. And like that's the role that you've had in my life. And I can't even remember, we've had so many interactions over the past number of years, that just hearing your story, hearing about your ancestors. I mean, I was doing research for the book and I came across this fact, but when you told me about your family's history, that St. Thomas Christians, Thomas, right? Um, that it just made sense in a different way. Like, why should say, why have I always understood the church to be rooted in a Western white tradition when the facts of the Bible and history are different. That's an example of a distorted imagination and an assumption that has carried through for so long that is part of colonization, part of empire, part of, something that was constructed that's not necessarily all bad. There's history, there's fact there, but it's not the whole truth.
Mm.
And so that was a big part of my own discovery and writing the evangelical imagination, and one that you played a big part in, and just especially in thinking about empire and its effects on our minds, our imaginations, and even our theology, which you talk about in your book.
Yeah, yeah. A couple of thoughts come to mind there. The first being, for those of you just tuning in, trying to unpack what exactly Karen is referring to here. So, my family has been worshiping Jesus for 2,000 years in southern India. We received the gospel from the Apostle Thomas, who planted 7 churches in India, among which my ancestors were some of the first Christians to come to the faith from Jewish as well as upper caste Hindu backgrounds 2,000 years ago. And we were Christian for 1,500 years before the first colonial powers showed up, with Western Christians not being faithful to a holistic proclamation of the gospel, but a distorted imagination of the gospel, as you so rightly pointed out, Karen. An imagination of the gospel that was shaped by their participation in colonialism, right? And again, I know that words that colonization, decolonization can be really uncomfortable for a lot of us. They can be political buzzwords even. But when Global South Christians, I was born and raised in India, grew up in an Indian house church. When Global South Christians talk about colonization, we're not talking about left versus right in the West. We're not talking about political arguments or academic concepts, even for the most part. We're talking about our lived experience, right? Like
Mhm.
India was 25% of the world's GDP before the colonial powers showed up. After the Brits left in 1947, it was 1% of the world's GDP. Clearly something happened there. A lot of wealth was extracted there. And what's really sad, what I point to in the first 2, 3 chapters of the book, is that the Western Church participated in the injustice of colonization and the extraction of wealth, but also resources like human resources. That's where slavery and transatlantic slave trade happened. And so, we can't change the past, but we can be faithful in the present, right? And that's my
Mhm.
call
Mhm.
for this, for all of us throughout this book. We have all inherited a beautiful faith from imperfect people, all of us. And I say this of even my ancestors. So my ancestors worshiped Jesus for 2,000 years, but it was only about 200 years ago, really 150 years ago, that we started allowing lower caste neighbors to come into the church, right? So what do I do with that? Well, I can't change the past. I can't change what I've inherited, but I can be faithful in the present. And being faithful in the present for all of us in the Western church means asking these good questions of the imaginations that have shaped our understanding of the gospel, and moving that back to an ancient Jesus-centered, neighbor-oriented way of loving God and neighbor. And this is, I think, what we both invite the church into, Karen. Yeah, and then the other thought that I had is, in your book, the Evangelical Imagination, you go so much into the Victorian imagination, with um, Jane Austen, and like just so much of what you study with literature and how you see the way that's shaped the evangelical imagination today. Tell us more about that, the Victorian era imagination that we see today.
Yeah, of course. So, since I'm talking about evangelical history, which is 300 years old, began in the 18th century, it really reached its peak in the 19th century, in the Victorian era, which not coincidentally is also when colonization, really was growing, and the British Empire literally ruled over 1/4 of the globe, and the sun never set on the British Empire for real because the empire was so spread out. And so a lot of the metaphors and images that we have inherited from evangelicalism, not all of them, but a lot of them, because they are cultural, come from the Victorian age, and are not necessarily entirely or totally biblical. And it's just so hard to strip what is extraneous to get to the core essence that is biblical. I mean, we are creatures of culture. God designed it that way. We're going to have our cultural biases and assumptions. And even when we talk about colonization, Joash, I was thinking about this. So many people seem fearful and afraid to interrogate these assumptions because I mean, we always talk about the benefits of colonization, which you point that out a lot in your book. Like we have benefited from it. And and okay, but we can also and should also talk about the negative aspects of it, the things that are not true, that are not lasting. And so there's no reason to fear naming and identifying whatever good there is along with whatever we need to correct. And so the same is true of sort of some of the Victorian ideas and notions that we've inherited, which came with the British Empire and has kind of colonized our imaginations and our assumptions because that's just how culture works. And we can recognize it, we have to recognize it before we can begin correcting and reorienting it toward, as you said, this more ancient way that is reflective and centered on Jesus.
So good. Yeah. And yeah, I appreciate the connection you made with the Victorian era and colonization because funnily enough, Queen Victoria was the first emperor of India, the first British emperor of India. She was the empress of India. And up until Queen Victoria's time, for 200 years before that, it was the British East India Company that had waged war and extracted resources, and there was a lot of corruption taking place. There was, there's this really good book by an Indian member of parliament, Shashi Tharoor, called Inglorious Empire. And anytime someone says, hey, colonization was good for India, including Indian uncles and aunties in the church I run into, can sometimes have that colonial shaped imagination. My pushback to them gently is why don't you just read this book called Inglorious Empire that talks about what the Brits did to India, like just the hard historical facts. In there, he talks about how the British East India Company would extract wealth, resources, and so many families, like the Pitt family that produced three prime ministers in the UK. Um, Made their wealth off of stolen wealth from people in India. In fact, the word loot, as you probably know, is a Hindi word. It comes from India.
I
It,
did not know that. That's fascinating.
the word loot is a Hindi word
Wow.
that literally means the same thing. And so, when the Brits would plunder India through the British East India Company, they would say, "Look at the loot I brought back home," and
Wow.
that was a word in Hindi as well for the same thing, for stolen wealth. And so it's shaped our imagination in all these ways that we haven't even started to unpack. And your book does so much of that. And it was Queen Victoria who ultimately, dissolved the British East India Company and took over control of India in 1857. Became the first Empress of India, and. And really, the empire's reasons for getting involved was more, hey, we have a lot more wealth here that we want to extract, but British East India Company, you're just enriching yourselves. And we want more of this to come to the empire and not just corrupt nobility, right? And so that's why Queen Victoria got the empire involved there. But yeah, that's just some historical context too. It's fascinating to me that you connect the dots there with that era of the British Empire and say that this is where the evangelical imagination was shaped. And
Mhm.
so many things, even the way we do missions, so much of that has been shaped from there. And to the credit of the Church of England today, they have been doing a lot of decolonizing work, being led by African and South Asian leaders, evangelical leaders saying, there are some healthy aspects to global mission, but there are unhealthy ways in which we do things that have also been shaped by the Victorian era imagination, and they're leading the charge on this that we can learn from. But I could talk about this forever. But
No, I
yeah,
wanted to jump in and say that was
please.
one of the parts of your book that was really helpful for me is when you contrast mission trips with vision trips, because we have seen a lot more critique and rightful re-examination of the traditional mission trip in which, we think we as the, Americans or dominant culture are coming to save and rescue some other culture. Like, we most of us realize now that's a wrong paradigm, and yet, we still have so much to learn from one another in the way that you cast the vision trip of like going to learn what's already being done. I mean, and I heard echoes. I'm kind of old school, still trying to learn. But one of my favorite books, and I cite this, and you have a calling, is Richard Blackaby's "Experiencing God," and his famous line is, find out what God is doing and join it, something like that.
Yes.
And when you talked about vision trips, that's what it was like. It was like, go to other places where the church is around the world and learn what they are already doing. Learn how they can help you and how you can support one another, which is an entirely different paradigm from the one that we inherited, from the Victorian age and from the colonization age. So I just really appreciated that about your book. It was helpful to me.
No, I'm so glad that was helpful. And yeah, I just love this conversation so much because, yeah, we're talking about imagination from your most not the most recent book, but the one before, the Evangelical Imagination. We're connecting themes with my book, The Justice of Jesus, and uh, shifting gears back to calling, and and especially for people in our audience. People in our audience, I imagine, are people who love Jesus and care deeply about our poor and oppressed neighbors, and try to sit in the tension of the two in a world that's shaped by distorted imaginations of don't love your neighbor too much, and things like that that have been shaped from the empires of our day. But I'm really curious. What advice would you have to someone? And this is Substack. We have a lot of aspiring writers here. What advice would you have to someone who loves Jesus, loves justice, and feels a calling to write and give voice to the wrestlings of the church
Mhm.
right now? Yeah, how would you encourage them, and what practical tips would you give them right now?
Yeah, well, I did mark in your book. I'll just
Yeah.
see if I can find it here. Where I love this is, and I will answer that question. But
No,
I
of
also want
course.
to say something else about
Please.
what I love about how you wrote this book. And we had a little exchange recently where I don't remember where I said
Mm,
this um, about your writing, like what you write about and how you write about it is like only Joash could do. Like, and that's the mark of a true writer. Like, you are really writing from your heart and mind and voice, and that is unique. And the way that you are so and this is you answering your calling. You are generous and gentle. You challenge, but you also have a way you understand a variety of perspectives because you come from, a politically conservative
yeah.
background where you had that role, and but you haven't renounced or rejected or declaimed those people. You are trying to speak to them and bridge so many gaps. And so you talk, it's toward the end of your book, you actually talk about calling, and you're talking about uh, financial justice is one thing that you talk about, and you say, I am not saying that all of us need to sell all our possessions, even though some of us may be called to do that. And then you talk about some of us may be called to look for vocations that support the marginalized, not all, but some. And this is really how callings work. There is no one size fits all. There's so much work to be done. We need to be open um, to the needs. There are needs all around us, and vocation, the pearl purpose of vocation is to serve our neighbors. So we need to be looking around to see where the need is and to listen for how God is calling us to fill a need. And it's just not going to be the same for everyone. And I think it's that formulaic approach, again, another form of colonization, where we think we have to do things the way it was done before, or the way someone else has done it. And that's not leaving room for the Holy Spirit. That's not leaving room for the way that needs are particular in our own context and our own neighborhood. And so I think calling, God uses calling to use us in our individuality and to use us in the very context and the time and the place that we're in.
Mm.
Um, and so we have to be open and receptive and be willing to answer the call, but we have to be able to see what the call is for us within the church and within the world where we are. And that's not an easy, I haven't given an answer of 5 steps.
Oh,
But
it's good.
your approach in talking just about this one important topic, justice, just opens so many doors for us to be able to begin trying to better discern the call.
Mm, that's so good. That's so good, Karen. What I hear you saying is our calling is very much shaped by our context that we find
Yeah.
ourselves within, right? That God has placed us within. And it really emerges from faithfulness, looking around and saying, what is my unique contribution here? And you're so right. Even as you said that, I feel like you gave voice to what's been my journey of figuring out how am I, as a two-time immigrant in North America, called to serve the church? How am I, as a global South Christian who's inherited this, ancient legacy of Christians who've been worshiping Jesus 2,000 years? How am I called to bring that to heal the Western church internally so that we can be a part of this mission of the Holy Spirit of healing the church, healing the world? That comes from the healing of the church, right? And that's also shaped my priestly calling in the church. So, this is so good. I so appreciate that. And so what I hear you saying is just be faithful and pay attention to your context and the opportunities being presented to you, and and do the next right thing in that context. Yeah. Yeah.
And we have to accept that our that we have some distorted understandings and assumptions, and just sort of knowing that leaves room for God to surprise us, right? Because He does want to use us in our callings, and they don't follow a formula, and we're all called to a particular place and time, and so um, I don't know why we're just tend to be so afraid to be open and to be surprised and to let God lead and take us down a road that perhaps we didn't expect. But that is the way of Jesus that you describe so beautifully in your book.
That's incredible, Karen. And folks watching, if you have a question for us, we'd love to see them in the chat. I think I saw a few questions and comments earlier. Um, just just very helpful commentary from I might be butchering this. What Yellen reports. Thanks for those thoughts. Um, I think I saw a question earlier about, let me see if I can find it. I think it was on the lines of faithfulness in our current context, but but maybe it's something that we've already touched base on. Oh yeah, there's a question here from Troy. How do we see better through our own cultural lenses?
Mhm.
I'll leave that to you, Karen, the wiser
Well,
person.
yeah, no, I mean, I think it's by reading, listening, talking to people who have different cultural lenses, right? Because we often don't realize that it's a cultural lens
Hmm.
that we're viewing things through until we see someone else who has a different cultural lens. And this is one of the beauties of the digital age, right? There's a lot we can complain about, a lot I do complain about, but it's just easier now than ever to be exposed to people from different experiences. Of course, we can always still read books. I definitely agree with that. That's how I feel like my cultural lens has been challenged over the course of my life, but just really being intentional about it. I mean, we just have to realize that people have different experiences, and people who get uncomfortable with talking about race and ethnicity and different experiences. I would just challenge you and say, well, we know that men and women experience the world differently. I don't think most people would deny that. So we can experience the world differently in a lot of different ways, and just ask one another, like, what is this like for you as this kind of person, that kind of person? What do we have in common? What have you experienced differently? That's that can be individual, but often it's largely cultural.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's very helpful. Um, Karen, what would you say? So folks here who are just finding you, um, and and I know that for you, I think I saw this recently somewhere. Your Substack is where you pay the bills, essentially, right? Like you're a pure author, a writer's writer, and this is where you have your support base to pay your bills. So, but really, how can people support you and your work, and where can people find you right now?
Yeah, well, of course, Substack is where I'm putting most of my energy these days, and I am, I do a variety of things there, but primarily I'm sort of treating it as a classroom where I can enjoy the British literature I've loved over the years and spread that joy to others. And I think that's what's happening. I mean, I do write books, and we've talked about a couple here, and do speak because I don't know, they don't tell you when you become a writer that then they want you to come talk about it, which I'm learning to do better. um, yeah, so I would say, and that it's not just financial support, although, we all need that, but just simply reading, sharing, you know, sharing posts and making connections between other writers like you. That's why I'm so excited about this, because we're getting a chance to introduce one another's audiences to each other. That's what makes, again, there's so much blessing to be had in the digital age because these things are possible. So, yeah, my Substack is the Priory. You can check me out there. Subscribe for all my posts are free. I'm really committed to that, and so anyone who pays to support me is just allowing that work to continue.
That's incredible, and yeah, I would say the same for myself. Although I'm, privileged to have a day job that pays the bills, I am pursuing a PhD program. I'm in the process of also uh, being ordained as a priest after being ordained as a deacon earlier this year. So those things have costs, and that's where my Substack community has come alongside me. And
Mhm.
I mean, really, the paid subscribers for my Substack community have funded my seminary education even before or ordination, and so it may not feel like a lot of support with the monthly rate, a few dollars a month, but it means so much to creatives and authors and people whose content you appreciate so much because there is a cost to going and making the time and the space to do the deep contemplative thinking, going back to history and doing that thinking and bringing that to the church. Like there's a research cost associated, there's a time cost, and it's just a good way to support your authors and writers. So do first, if you're not a paid subscriber for the Priory, do sign up today. I'm a fundraiser for human rights, so I have to do this. And Karen did ask me to
That
do
is a
this.
gift that some people have. So thank you for using that gift.
Well, that's great. And I see another question here from Troy. Troy's got really great questions today, by the way. He asks, how do we continue to cultivate curiosity? Yeah, what would you say, Karen?
Mm. Wow. We live in such an overwhelming time. I think a lot of us, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, it's tempting to just kind of want to shut things off and shut them down. And there is a lot that we probably should shut off. And so,
Mm,
again, I think you mentioned, Joash, just now, the requirement of just having that space to think and reflect, it's so important, and so we need to cultivate that for ourselves. You don't even have to be a writer or creative or whatever, but we all are human beings, and we need to do that. And so I think, um, quieting things down so that you can pursue something that seems like it's good, and follow your thinking and reading and learning more about it. Maybe it's a matter of just trying hard in this time to choose quality over quantity, so that we can remain curious. That's really, really important. And of course, Substack is a great place to be introduced to deeper thoughts. I mean,
mm,
True Confessions. Joash and I were talking about this before. We're longtime users of X or Twitter. We I don't know if you're still on, I think you are, but we were there when it was a pretty neat place to be, a place to share articles and stories and have conversations. It's really not that anymore. But Substack has become a place to share even deeper kinds of reflections and writing and be exposed to different kinds of thinkers and channels that allow you to cultivate your curiosity. So there's so many ways to. We have to desire it, and so we have to practice it.
That's so good. I'm so glad you raised that, Karen, because something I appreciate so much about your voice and something that I'm trying to do more and more of myself is just that big picture, behind the scenes, contemplative thinking, um, and realizing that our best advocacy for our marginalized neighbors will come out of that proactive, contemplative space where we're not constantly caught up in the traumas and anxieties of this world in an outrage ecosystem, and in an ecosystem that honestly rewards content creators
Yeah,
that lean into outrage.
yeah,
We're trying to do the difficult work
yeah.
of, hey, let's take a step back and reimagine things and try to be more timeless that way, right? And so I so appreciate you doing that and your invitation to for all of us to lean into that. Yeah.
Very unprofitable work, but it profitable in the best ways. I actually, I had this book. I want to share this. I've been reading this A Calendar of Wisdom from of Leo Tolstoy. It's like a daily devotional. And there was a quote that actually for today's reading actually that addresses Troy's question and what we've been saying. So can I read some this quote?
Please.
Okay, all
Sure.
right. So this is for the November 4th entry. Um, Dep and this again talks about the sort of toxic, the outrage, clickbait, outrage farming. I don't even know what the terms are, but just avoiding that. So Tolstoy says, debates conceal the truth more often than they reveal it. Real truth should be revealed in solitude. When it is revealed, it becomes clear to you that you can accept it without any argument or discussions. He has power who can keep silent in an argument even though he is right.
Wow.
That convicted me today. So, yeah, that just fits perfectly with what we've been talking about here. So, thank you, Leo Tolstoy. I love you.
That's so good. That's such good wisdom. Yeah, that restraint, that humility, and we see this in Jesus too, right? This is why Jesus cultivated curiosity by asking questions, and he did that so much. And
Ah,
he had answers, but he
mm,
would take the posture of just asking these questions, and that's something I've realized in my own journey. For those of us right now who are struggling to find hope, for people in our churches and our families who are so politically trapped one way or the other in their imaginations that they can't love their neighbors unconditionally the way Jesus loved us. It's easy for us to have that discouragement, but yeah, what does it look like for us to lean into um, just asking questions with a posture of curiosity to learn, not to make a point even. And I say this often, but what was most helpful to me in my journey of moving away from political idolatry towards Jesus and justice was people gently accompanying me in life and asking me questions,
mm,
saying, "Huh, where in the life of Jesus do you see that?"
mm,
Huh, like you
mm,
have this political position. Interesting. How do you defend that with your Christian faith, and more specifically in the Gospels with how Jesus lived his life, right? And it's those questions that poked enough holes that ultimately the light flooded in, right? And so for me today, this is my calling. My calling is to ask those questions of the church, of those rigid, closed memories and imaginations, and just poke holes. Just be faithful in poking holes gently, and ultimately, it's the Spirit that lets the light flood in. It's the Spirit that persuades people. My job is to just be faithful and accompanying people, meeting them where they are, just like Jesus was with me and
mm,
us as humankind. So yeah.
mm. No,
Uh,
that's so beautiful. That is the way of Jesus, right? Asking good questions so that we can, and even that's good pedagogy. I mean, any research related to good teaching will tell you that when a learner feels like they have discovered something for themselves, which often happens can happen in a variety of ways, but one of them is just asking a question to show rather than tell, to
mm,
prompt rather than to sort of to pontificate, that actually the learning is deeper and longer lasting because it is like feels like a self-discovery, even though we've perhaps been guided into it, which is of course what Jesus did in the way that he taught.
so good. Wow, so good. No, thanks for that, Karen. Um, yeah, we're gonna wrap up our conversation here. This has been so rich, and
So
I
good.
feel like conversations don't need to be long to have depth and substance. Like this just feels like a good landing place for us. So again, what I would say is, if you haven't bought Karen's book, Karen Swallow Prior's book, You Have a Calling, please do so today. It's a quick read, and it'll challenge you and give you hope in the best ways possible. The other Karen Swallow Prior book I'll plug just because I enjoyed it so much, and not just because,
And you're
uh,
in it.
yeah, not just because I'm in it and my family faith tradition is in it, but the evangelical imagination has just been helpful to so many people and widening their imagination, even within the evangelical church. Yeah, and the justice of Jesus. It's out wherever you buy your books. It's my hope for this book is to be a resource that, if someone comes up to you and says, "This justice thing is more political than biblical," my hope is that you can just give this person the book and say, "Here, read this book. Come back. We'll have a conversation." And walk with people that way. So yeah, just some helpful resources for us in these discouraging times, to give us hope and a positive way forward, and to reimagine, really, which is
Mm,
so much of what our work is about, both of our work. So, yeah, Karen, thanks so much for doing
thank
this.
you. Thank you
Yeah,
for having me. It was lovely. I'm so thankful for our conversation.
this is great. Yeah, blessings, everyone.